Beneath every great medieval city ran a hidden world of water. We remember the knights and castles, but the true power was a network of aqueducts, wells, and conduits that shaped these urban centers in 24 profound ways. This journey uncovers how water systems built empires and then threatened to destroy them from within. You will discover the complete story of medieval ingenuity and its hidden costs, a narrative that still shapes our cities today. How did a public fountain become a tool for both community and control? Why did the very systems designed to ensure survival sometimes lead to catastrophic failure? What does the struggle for clean water in the past tell us about our own future? How do you think a society's greatest strength can also become its most dangerous weakness? The grandeur of Rome had long since crumbled, leaving its magnificent aqueducts as broken stone skeletons across the landscape. For the early medieval town, water was a daily gamble. You relied on a local well that might run dry or a river that carried the filth of the entire settlement upstream. Within the cramped safety of city walls, populations began to swell, and the sheer pressure of so many people needing to drink, to cook, and to clean created a crisis that demanded a new solution. This was the quiet dawn of urban hydraulics, a turning point where necessity sparked a revolution in how cities functioned. Across Europe and the flourishing Islamic world, engineers and visionaries began to rethink the very flow of water. It was often within the disciplined walls of monastic communities where this new chapter was written. Monks, preserving fragments of Roman engineering texts, became master hydrologists. They designed sophisticated networks of lead pipes, wooden conduits, and settling tanks that channeled fresh spring water from miles away, creating self-sufficient sanctuaries of cleanliness and industry. This was not merely a technical achievement, it was a shift in the very soul of a city. Access to clean, plentiful water became a powerful symbol of civic pride and authority. A town with a magnificent public fountain was not just prosperous, it was sophisticated, powerful, and divinely favored. The race to build these systems laid the foundational stone for everything that was to come, setting the stage for a transformation so profound it would make and break empires. The sound of flowing water in a town square signaled more than just a fresh drink. It announced the arrival of a new civic era. In the heart of a bustling medieval city, the public fountain was far more than a piece of infrastructure. It was the community's living room, its newsroom, and its most powerful symbol of collective well-being. Before these fountains, water was a private, often desperate struggle, drawn from questionable wells within cramped courtyards. The new systems changed everything. Engineers harnessed the simple, relentless power of gravity, building networks of underground conduits, sometimes from springs miles away, to deliver a steady, reliable flow right into the public square. This was a monumental leap, shifting the entire city from isolated, unreliable sources to a shared, regulated lifeline. Cities like Siena in Italy poured immense wealth and artistic talent into their fountains, transforming them into breathtaking monuments. They were adorned with intricate sculptures of lions, wolves, and local saints, each carving a declaration of the city's identity and power. The water itself seemed to flow with civic pride. This centralized distribution had a profound social impact. The daily burden of water fetching, a task that fell overwhelmingly on women and children, was dramatically reduced. The journey to a distant well was replaced by a shorter trip to a central, social hub. More importantly, it established a cleaner, safer drinking source, moving the community away from contaminated private wells. Yet this new convenience came with a price. The entire system relied on constant, vigilant maintenance. Conduits clogged, pipes cracked, and the source springs needed protection. The fountain's continuous flow was a testament not just to engineering, but to a fragile, ongoing pact of communal effort, a theme that would echo through every water system to come. But that clean, public water flowing from ornate fountains had to go somewhere once it was used. The very success of these new water supplies created a new and more dangerous problem: the relentless tide of waste. In the cramped, shadowy streets of a medieval city, the air was thick with the stench of daily life. Animal dung, food scraps, and human waste collected in open gutters, a filthy stew that seeped into the soil and contaminated the same water sources people relied on. This was the silent, constant threat that lurked just beneath the surface of urban prosperity. The response was a slow, gritty revolution in sanitation. Cities began carving open channels down the centers of streets, simple trenches designed to carry rainwater and waste away from the most populated areas. London, for instance, started constructing more elaborate underground conduits in the 12th century, channeling this foul flow directly into the River Thames. This was a monumental shift in thinking. It was an admission that a city could not simply generate filth, it had to manage it. These primitive sewers, while no more than open gutters by our standards, represented a critical first step in public health. They physically removed disease-ridden waste from the heart of the city, likely reducing outbreaks of sickness that had once been a fact of urban life. But this solution came with a terrible, unseen cost. The waste was not being treated or purified, it was simply being moved. All of that contamination was now funneled directly into the rivers that often supplied drinking water for communities downstream, or even for the same city further along the bank. The system solved one crisis by quietly creating another, a perfect example of a solution becoming the next problem. How do you manage progress when every fix has a hidden consequence? That rhythmic thrum of turning water wheels became the heartbeat of the medieval urban economy. Along the rivers that flowed through and around growing cities, engineers constructed sophisticated mills that did far more than just grind grain. They powered massive wooden hammers for fulling cloth, driving the felt-making process that was vital to the textile trade. They operated bellows for forges and trip hammers for forging metal, creating the first widespread mechanization of industry. This was a revolution in productivity, one that fundamentally reshaped the urban landscape and its workforce. Water power liberated human and animal labor from back-breaking tasks, allowing for a new level of specialization. The miller became a central, powerful figure in the community. Brewers and weavers could scale up their operations, their trades flourishing with the consistent, powerful energy provided by the flowing river. A single water mill was an economic engine, generating immense revenue for its owner, who was often the local lord or the town council itself. Control over this technology meant control over wealth, sparking fierce and sometimes violent disputes over water rights. Who had the right to divert a stream? Who could build a new mill if it slowed the water flow to another downstream? The very force that drove economic growth also concentrated power and sowed conflict, embedding a deep tension between collective progress and private control into the fabric of the city. This concentration of economic power through water access would soon reveal its social cost, creating divisions as clear as the channels that directed the flow itself. A wide, shimmering moat was more than just a barrier. It was a statement of power, a liquid wall that transformed the very ground beneath an attacker's feet into a treacherous obstacle. While public fountains nurtured life within the city, these defensive waterways were engineered for a single, stark purpose: to protect it from destruction. Constructing a moat was a monumental feat of hydraulic engineering. It was not simply a dug ditch left to fill with rain. Engineers had to create a permanent, reliable water source, often by diverting a nearby river or tapping into springs, and then design complex sluice gates and drainage channels to maintain a consistent water level regardless of the weather. This turned the natural landscape into a deliberate weapon. A castle perched on a hill with a man-made lake at its base was using topography itself as a shield. Military strategists note that a well-maintained moat forced any invading army into a slow, costly, and dangerous process. Attackers could not simply scale the walls. They had to build cumbersome siege towers or assemble floating bridges, all while under a constant hail of arrows and stones from the battlements above. The moat bought the defenders the most valuable resource in any siege: time. It could stretch a conflict for weeks or even months, draining the supplies and morale of the attacking force. Yet this powerful defense held a dark secret within its still waters. A moat that was not actively managed, its water not regularly flushed and renewed, would quickly turn stagnant. It became a breeding ground for mosquitoes and a repository for all manner of waste, creating a foul, disease-ridden swamp right up against the city walls. The very structure designed to keep death out could, through neglect, begin to cultivate it from within. This paradox of protection would soon find a parallel in the most intimate of urban spaces, where the quest for private comfort began to reshape the entire city, creating a new kind of division between the powerful and the powerless. The invisible hand of water carved the very map of the medieval city. While fountains brought communities together and mills powered industry, the relentless need for clean water and the disposal of waste forced a new kind of urban planning, an informal zoning that determined who lived where and why. This created a hidden hydraulic geography, a landscape of advantage and disadvantage dictated by the flow of water. Tanners who used foul-smelling chemicals to treat leather, and dyers whose vats produced vibrant but toxic runoff, were almost always pushed to the city's outskirts, placed deliberately downstream. This was a crude but logical recognition of environmental cause and effect. By exiling these polluting trades, the city protected its upstream drinking wells and public fountains. Yet this logic came with a profound social cost. The neighborhoods that grew up around these downstream industrial zones were inevitably the poorest. The air was thick with chemical fumes, and the local water sources, whether a river or a shallow well, were permanently contaminated by the upstream waste. Meanwhile, the urban elite, the merchants and nobles, secured their residences near the cleanest water sources, often uphill where springs emerged or where private conduits could be tapped directly into their homes. Their water was not just cleaner, it was more convenient, a private luxury that stood in stark contrast to the public struggle at the communal fountain. This early zoning did not just separate clean trades from dirty ones, it physically cemented the city's social hierarchy into the ground itself, creating a division of class and health that would be incredibly difficult to wash away. The very systems designed to protect public health had, by their simple geography, institutionalized inequality, ensuring that the burden of pollution fell heaviest on those with the least power to resist it. Steam rose in soft clouds, carrying the scent of herbs and the low murmur of conversation. The medieval bathhouse was a world unto itself, a sanctuary of warmth and water where the rigid lines of class and daily labor momentarily blurred. Far from a simple place to wash, these establishments were the social clubs of their era, inspired by the grand Roman thermae and the sophisticated hammams of the Islamic world. Inside, you would find merchants discussing deals in hot pools, friends sharing news, and families enjoying a rare communal leisure activity. This was a revolutionary concept that cleanliness and relaxation were not private indulgences but public goods. For a few coins, a person could access a level of bodily comfort typically reserved for the wealthy, a profound democratization of well-being that strengthened community bonds. Yet this very openness drew the suspicion of religious reformers who saw the relaxed, unguarded atmosphere as a potential for vice. More critically, the warm, shared waters that promised health also concealed an invisible threat. In an age before the understanding of germs, the same pool that washed away the grime of one patron could passively transfer sickness to the next. The bathhouse, therefore, embodies a central tension in our story, a place where water simultaneously promoted hygiene and, in certain circumstances, accelerated contagion. It was a grand social experiment in collective living, demonstrating that even the most well-intentioned innovations carry inherent risks, a lesson that would soon be tested on a catastrophic scale. Within the protective shadow of the city walls, a different kind of defense was quietly cultivated in small, vibrant gardens and orderly orchards. These were not mere decorations. They were strategic assets, fed by a secondary web of irrigation channels that branched from the main public conduits. This was urban agriculture at its most vital, a system designed to make a city resilient. When a siege came and the gates closed, cutting off supplies from the outside, these internal plots became a lifeline, providing fresh vegetables, fruits, and herbs to sustain the population. It was a direct application of water power to the problem of food security, reducing a city's vulnerability to famine and the whims of distant farmers. Medieval manuscripts often depict this quiet labor, showing gardeners using simple but effective tools like the shadoof, a counter-weighted lever that allowed one person to lift water from a canal and pour it into the garden beds. This technology, borrowed from ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian farmers, was perfectly adapted to the scale of a medieval town. But this local bounty came with a hidden tax on the city's most precious resource. Every drop diverted to nourish a cabbage patch or an apple tree was a drop not flowing to a public fountain or a household tap. The very success of these gardens created intense competition. Who had the right to the water? The baker who needed it for his dough, the dyer for his vats, or the gardener for his vegetables? This was resource competition at its most fundamental, pitting the need for daily sustenance against the need for long-term survival, a delicate balancing act that would soon be tested by an even greater demand, one that emerged from the very heart of faith and community. A crackle of flame in the night could erase an entire city in hours. In a world of tightly packed timber and thatch, fire was the ultimate urban terror, a force that respected neither wealth nor status. This ever-present danger forged one of the most critical uses for the public water system: organized firefighting. Municipal governments did not leave this to chance. They mandated that households keep barrels of water or sand at the ready, transforming every citizen into a first responder. More strategically, they maintained public cisterns and wells at key intersections, not just for daily use, but as dedicated reservoirs for emergencies. In cities like Nuremberg, official records show strict ordinances enforcing this preparedness, turning the communal water supply into a literal shield against annihilation. Some of the larger, wealthier cities even funded dedicated fire watchmen and brigades, teams trained to respond with a speed and coordination that could mean the difference between a contained blaze and a city-wide inferno. This was the water network at its most heroic, a collective defense mechanism that saved countless lives and irreplaceable property. Yet this entire system of safety rested on a single, fragile assumption that the water would always be there. A drought, a broken conduit, or a frozen cistern could render the most organized bucket brigade utterly useless. The very resource they depended on for survival was also a potential point of catastrophic failure, a vulnerability that would soon be exploited not by flame, but by an invisible enemy lurking in the water itself. The gentle splash of holy water against a cathedral's stone font echoed with a promise far deeper than any physical cleansing. In the medieval world, water flowed through the very soul of the city, connecting the daily life of the streets to the eternal truths of faith. The grand baptismal font inside the cathedral was not merely a container. It was the gateway to spiritual life, a sacred point where a new member was welcomed into the community of believers. But the sacred geography of water extended far beyond the church walls. On the city's outskirts, ancient holy wells drew pilgrims from across the countryside. These were places where the divine was believed to break through the earthly realm, their waters credited with healing the sick and answering prayers. A journey to a well dedicated to a local saint became an act of profound devotion, intertwining the landscape with layers of spiritual meaning. This sacred status had very practical consequences. A spring considered holy was often protected from pollution by powerful cultural taboos. A community might fiercely guard such a source, preserving its purity in a way that secular law alone could not enforce. Theologians and preachers constantly referenced water's symbolic power, speaking of it as a liquid capable of washing away sin and renewing the spirit. This belief infused the entire urban waterscape with a divine purpose, turning a simple conduit into a vessel of grace. Yet this deep reverence could also become a barrier to progress. Imagine an engineer proposing to reroute the pipes feeding a centuries-old holy well to improve pressure for a new neighborhood. The proposal would meet not just practical objections, but a wall of spiritual resistance. The community might see such a change as a desecration, a breaking of a covenant with the divine that had protected them for generations. This created a constant, quiet tension between the needs of a growing, changing city and the timeless pull of tradition, a conflict where faith itself could either safeguard a precious resource or stubbornly block its most efficient use. How do you modernize a system that people believe is touched by the hand of God? This spiritual friction reveals that the greatest obstacles to progress are not always made of stone and mortar, but of belief and memory. The steady pulse of a water wheel was the drumbeat of the medieval workshop. Along the canals and riverbanks, entire neighborhoods dedicated themselves to a single craft, their identities forged by the water they used. Brewers needed vast quantities for their vats, dyers for their steaming pots of color, and metalworkers for cooling and powering their trip hammers. This reliable, constant flow allowed these artisans to think bigger. A brewer was no longer limited to a few barrels for his own tavern. He could scale up his operation, supplying ale to an entire district. This was the engine of urban economic diversification, turning a town known for one thing into a city known for many. This scaling up led to the formation of powerful guilds. These were not just social clubs, they were regulatory bodies that controlled quality, set prices, and protected the secrets of water-intensive trades. A dyer's guild, for instance, would fiercely guard the knowledge of which mineral salts produced the most vibrant crimson or the deepest blue, knowledge that was useless without a guaranteed flow of clean water for the dye vats. Cities with superior water access did not just grow, they specialized. The cloth-making towns of Flanders became famous across Europe, their entire regional identity built upon the power of their rivers to clean, full, and dye wool. This industrial concentration created incredible wealth and a new class of urban professionals. But this progress had a dark, flowing shadow. The very water that gave these crafts their life also carried away their poison. The dyer's runoff, laced with toxic metals and fixatives, turned the river downstream into a rainbow of contamination. The tanner's waste, a foul mix of animal flesh and chemicals, festered in the water. The system that enabled specialization and wealth for some was silently poisoning the resource for everyone else, a hidden failure that would soon demand a reckoning. That vibrant, flowing river that powered the mills and supplied the fountains carried a hidden poison. The grand achievement of medieval water systems was silently undermined by a failure they could not yet see: contamination. Human waste from privies seeped into the ground, often just a few feet away from the wooden pipes that carried drinking water. The runoff from tanneries and slaughterhouses, rich with blood and chemicals, flowed directly into the same streams communities used for cooking and cleaning. This created a perfect storm for disease. Waterborne illnesses like dysentery, with its violent, bloody flux, and typhoid fever, with its raging temperatures and rose-colored spots, became recurring nightmares in even the most advanced cities. People noticed the correlation, of course. Town records from periods of plague or pestilence frequently described the local water sources as foul and stinking. They knew something was wrong with the water, but they lacked the crucial understanding of germ theory. They blamed bad air or miasmas or divine wrath for the outbreaks. They never saw the microscopic invaders thriving in the conduits they had worked so hard to build. This is the tragic irony. The very network designed to promote health and cleanliness was, in many cases, actively spreading death. The engineering was sophisticated enough to move water across great distances, but the science was not yet there to protect its purity at the point of delivery. This gap between hydraulic ambition and biological reality meant that a public fountain could be a source of both civic pride and communal sickness, a sobering lesson in how progress without full understanding can create the very crises it seeks to solve. The ornate public fountain flowing in the main square told a story of shared prosperity, but it was a story with two very different chapters. For the wealthy merchant living in his stone house on the hill, water was a private convenience. He could pay to have a lead pipe installed directly from the main conduit, bringing a steady stream right into his own courtyard. His family never had to leave their home to fetch water. For the carpenter's family in a crowded lane at the city's edge, however, water was a public chore. Their only source was that same central fountain, a long walk away, where they would wait in line with dozens of others, their heavy buckets a daily reminder of their place in the urban hierarchy. This was the second hidden failure of these systems, the quiet entrenchment of social inequality through something as basic as water access. The burden of collection, a time-consuming and physically demanding task, fell overwhelmingly on the poor, and especially on their women and children. Hours that could have been spent learning a trade, in schooling, or in rest were instead devoted to the endless cycle of carrying water. Legal records from cities like London and Paris are filled with disputes over this very issue. A monastery might use its influence to divert a larger share of a spring to its own brew house and fish ponds, starving the public conduits downstream. A powerful noble could have a branch pipe illegally tapped into the main line, reducing the pressure for everyone else. This unequal access became a matter of life and death during a crisis. In a prolonged drought, the private taps kept flowing while the public wells ran dry. During a siege, when the gates were sealed and the public fountains were cut off to conserve the internal supply, the elite with their private cisterns could last for months, while the poor faced dehydration within days. The water network, designed to unify the city, had instead carved its social divisions into the very bedrock of daily life, creating a fracture that would take centuries to heal. A sophisticated water system was only as strong as its most neglected pipe. Those elaborate networks of hollowed-out logs, lead channels, and stone conduits snaking beneath the streets faced a relentless, invisible enemy: decay. Wood rotted under constant moisture, lead pipes corroded and split, and masonry channels cracked under the shifting weight of the city above. This demanded a continuous, costly cycle of inspection and repair, a burden that many medieval municipalities struggled to bear. Town financial records from places like London and Paris are filled with anxious entries about the expense of maintaining the conduits, revealing a constant tension between immediate needs and long-term infrastructure. Corruption often siphoned away the funds meant for upkeep, while the sheer difficulty of accessing underground sections meant problems were often ignored until a major rupture left an entire district without water. This neglect created a fragile system, one that functioned beautifully on the surface while slowly crumbling out of sight. In times of peace, this was an inconvenience. In times of war, it became a fatal weakness. Besieging armies quickly learned that a city's water supply was its most vulnerable point. Invaders would deliberately poison wells, smash aqueducts, or divert the upstream sources that fed a city's conduits. Historical accounts describe cities brought to their knees not by storming the walls, but by patiently waiting as their internal cisterns ran dry and their public fountains fell silent. The very infrastructure designed to make a city resilient during a siege could be turned against it, transforming a technological marvel into a weapon for its own destruction. Modern archaeology provides stark evidence of this ongoing struggle. Excavations of medieval water systems rarely reveal a single, perfect construction. Instead, they uncover a messy history of patchwork repairs, a section of new lead pipe clumsily welded onto old, a stone channel patched with brick, and then later with timber. This tells a story of reactive fixes, not proactive management, a cycle of decay and temporary solutions that left the entire network perpetually on the brink of failure. The grand achievement of medieval urban water systems was therefore shadowed by a profound fragility, a reminder that the most brilliant innovation is worthless without the enduring will and resources to sustain it. This lesson in the critical importance of resilient infrastructure, written in broken pipes and abandoned conduits, echoes with unmistakable urgency into our own modern world. The steady flow of a city's water came at a cost the landscape itself was forced to pay. As urban populations swelled, the demand for water grew insatiable, leading to the first hidden failure of environmental degradation. Rivers that had flowed for centuries were slowly bled dry, their levels dropping as more and more water was diverted into municipal conduits and private pipes. The natural springs that fed them could not recharge fast enough, and the water table, that hidden reservoir beneath the soil, began to sink. This did not just affect the city. Downstream, farming villages that had relied on the same river for irrigation for generations watched their fields wither and their own wells turn to dust. The city's thirst was literally draining the life from the countryside, creating a bitter conflict between urban and rural needs. To build and maintain these vast water systems, forests were felled on a massive scale. Timber was needed for the endless repairs to wooden pipes and conduits, and more critically, to fuel the industries that water power had unleashed. This deforestation stripped the hillsides bare, and without the deep roots of trees to hold the soil in place, the land began to erode. With every rainfall, tons of precious topsoil would wash into the rivers, silting up the channels and clogging the very mills the wood had helped build. Chroniclers of the time left us subtle clues, noting with confusion that fish species once abundant in local streams had vanished, their habitats destroyed by the cloudy, polluted water from upstream tanneries and fulling mills. The connection was not yet understood, but these were the early, unmistakable signs of human activity permanently altering an ecosystem. The quest for urban prosperity was undermining the agricultural foundation that made that prosperity possible, creating a vicious cycle where the solution to one problem actively worsened another. This unsustainable relationship between a city and its environment reveals a profound truth that no civilization can outlast the resources it depends on, a lesson written not in stone but in vanishing forests and sinking water tables. The marketplace was the city's beating heart, and every pulse depended on water. Without a reliable source nearby, the entire chaotic symphony of trade would have ground to a halt. Think of the animals first. Hundreds of horses, oxen, and pack mules filled the market squares, all needing to drink. The dust kicked up by their hooves, and the crowd had to be settled. Merchants used water to clean their goods, from rinsing vegetables to wiping down bolts of cloth, making them more appealing to buyers. This constant demand transformed the location of markets, anchoring them firmly near public conduits, riverbanks, or communal wells. Port cities took this dependency to its logical extreme. A harbor was more than a dock, it was a complete water-powered economic engine. The same river that brought trade ships deep inland also turned the mills that processed the cargo they carried. A ship laden with raw English wool could dock at a Flemish port, and that wool could be carried just a short distance to a water-powered fulling mill, cleaned and thickened, then to a dye works using the same water source, and finally returned to the ship as finished, valuable cloth. Water didn't just facilitate trade, it compressed the entire production cycle, generating immense profits within a tiny geographic area. This integration created wealth on an unprecedented scale, drawing merchants from across the known world and weaving cities into a global web of commerce. But this very efficiency bred a dangerous fragility. A city whose market, port, and industries all relied on the same hydraulic network had placed all its eggs in one very vulnerable basket. A prolonged drought, a shattered aqueduct, or a diverted stream could paralyze the market, silence the mills, and empty the harbor of ships in a matter of weeks. The source of its greatest prosperity became the pinpoint of its most catastrophic potential collapse. A judge's gavel could be as important as an engineer's blueprint in the daily struggle for water. As medieval cities grew more dependent on their intricate water systems, they faced a new challenge: how to govern this flowing, shared resource. The result was a complex and often contradictory body of water law, a web of customs, royal decrees, and municipal statutes that attempted to bring order to the chaos. The most fundamental concept was riparian rights, an ancient principle stating that those who owned land along a riverbank had a right to make reasonable use of its flow. But what was reasonable to a lord building a new mill might seem like theft to a farmer downstream whose irrigation channel suddenly ran dry. This inherent tension forced towns to create their own detailed regulations, meticulously recorded in town charters and guild records. These were the first municipal water codes, and they tackled everything from the width of public conduits to the punishment for washing dirty laundry in a drinking fountain. In London, you could face a hefty fine for dumping your household waste into the Cheapside conduit, a clear recognition that protecting public health required the force of law. These legal frameworks were a monumental innovation. They represented a society's attempt to manage a commons, to balance individual desires against the collective good. Disputes over water access frequently escalated, moving from shouted arguments at the riverbank to solemn proceedings in high courts. Judges were forced to weigh a nobleman's claim to a private fish pond against a town's need for drinking water, setting legal precedents that slowly defined the concept of public welfare. This delicate negotiation between private property and public need is a battle that continues in courtrooms to this day. Yet this legal system, for all its promise, was far from perfect. The law could be a blunt instrument, and its complexities often created bureaucratic mazes that only the wealthy and educated could navigate. a rich merchant could afford to sue a rival over water rights, tying up the case for years, while a poor family whose well was poisoned by an upstream tannery had little hope of legal redress. The powerful learned to manipulate the system, using their influence to secure favorable rulings or to ignore inconvenient regulations altogether. The very laws designed to ensure fair access could, in practice, become just another tool for consolidating control, revealing that even the most well-intentioned rules are only as just as the society that enforces them. Stone and water merged into a single, breathtaking declaration of civic pride. The most profound transformation of the medieval water system was not hidden underground but displayed for all to see, as purely functional structures became canvases for a city's soul. Engineers and stonemasons collaborated to turn the humble well into a sculpted well house, a miniature cathedral dedicated to water, its openings framed by delicate Gothic tracery. The bridges that carried aqueducts across valleys were not bare stone arches. They were procession routes adorned with statues of patron saints and local heroes, their stone faces gazing down upon the flowing water they were built to protect. Every public fountain was an opportunity for artistic competition, with intricate carvings depicting mythological beasts, biblical scenes, and the heraldic symbols of the ruling family. This was a deliberate fusion of form and function, where the act of drawing water was transformed into a daily encounter with beauty, reinforcing a shared identity with every visit. To construct these marvels, masons developed revolutionary techniques, perfecting the ribbed vault to create wider, more stable cistern chambers, and using precise geometry to ensure that even the most ornate conduit maintained a steady, reliable flow. The influence of these water features extended into private life as well, with the wealthy designing courtyards and cloister gardens around central fountains, the gentle sound of splashing water creating an oasis of calm. This architectural legacy shaped urban design for centuries, establishing the principle that public infrastructure should enrich the spirit as well as serve the body. Yet this glorious aesthetic came with a quiet cost. The budget for a single ornate fountain, with its imported marble and master sculptor, could have paid for miles of simple, functional lead piping to underserved neighborhoods. The political will to create a stunning monument was often easier to muster than the mundane, ongoing commitment to repair a cracked conduit in a poor district. The very beauty that celebrated the water system could sometimes mask its inequalities, raising a difficult question that echoes to this day. Should public works aspire to be art, and if so, does that ambition inevitably divert resources from the plain, essential work of universal access? A master well digger did not simply dig a hole. He listened to the earth, interpreting subtle signs in the vegetation and the lay of the land to find the hidden veins of water deep below. This specialized knowledge made him one of the most vital figures in the growing medieval city, part of a new class of civic engineers whose expertise in hydraulics became as valuable to urban governance as any knight or merchant. These were the conduit keepers who walked the miles-long routes of the water system, tapping on lead pipes with a hammer to listen for cracks, and the millwrights who understood the precise geometry of gears and water flow to maximize power. Their professions emerged directly from the city's dependency on its water network, transforming what was once ad hoc labor into a respected, formalized career path. These experts formed powerful guilds, organizations that controlled entry into the trade through long and demanding apprenticeships. A young man would spend years learning the secrets of his master, from how to line a well shaft with watertight masonry to the proper pitch for an underground conduit to maintain a steady flow. This system of knowledge transfer was slow and deliberate. but it ensured that hard-won technical understanding of geology, physics, and materials was preserved and gradually improved upon across generations. Municipal governments recognized their value, employing them directly to design new systems and perform constant maintenance, effectively professionalizing the city's circulatory system. This shift brought a new level of reliability. A network cared for by a dedicated conduit keeper was far less likely to fail catastrophically than one left to chance. Yet this professionalization created a new, hidden vulnerability. It concentrated all of this crucial technical knowledge into the minds of a very small group of people. The entire city now depended on the expertise of a few dozen master well diggers and millwrights. If they were lost to a plague, or if a siege prevented them from reaching a broken conduit, the entire system could collapse into incomprehensible ruin. The very specialization that made the system robust also made it brittle, placing the fate of the city's water in the hands of a fragile human chain of knowledge. How secure is any society when its survival depends on the skills of just a few? Frozen canals transformed into glittering highways of laughter each winter. The same waterways that powered mills and carried trade now became the city's most democratic ballroom, a smooth sheet of ice where a shoemaker's son could skate circles alongside a merchant's daughter. This was the 15th transformation, where water systems gave birth to cultural and recreational spaces, carving out rare moments of pure communal joy in the hard rhythm of medieval life. When the cold locked the rivers solid, entire communities took to the ice. Chronicles describe townsfolk lacing on bone skates, their joyous shouts echoing as they played games of early hockey or simply glided together, their social ranks momentarily forgotten in the shared thrill of motion. In warmer months, the rivers hosted boat races and regattas, their surfaces alive with colorful banners and the cheers of spectators crowding the banks. The waterfront itself was the city's grandest stage. It was here that a king might hold a lavish tournament, the jousting lists set up along the riverbank so the reflected glory of the combatants shimmered on the water. It was here that a city-wide festival would culminate, with floating pageants and fireworks bursting over the river, their colors dancing on the waves. Artistic depictions from illuminated manuscripts and tapestries consistently returned to these scenes, not to record an engineering feat, but to capture the human experience, the laughter and conversation that thrived where land met water. This recreational life wove a powerful social fabric, knitting together the diverse inhabitants of a crowded city through shared memories and common pleasures. Yet this vibrant cultural life came with a quiet, practical cost. The civic funds and labor used to maintain a clean, navigable river for boating festivals were resources not spent repairing a leaky conduit in a poor parish. The political will to dredge a canal for a royal water pageant was often more easily found than the commitment to extend a pipe to a new neighborhood. The water that brought the city together in celebration could also highlight the choices a society makes about what and who is prioritized. How do we balance the water that feeds our spirit with the water that sustains our basic life? This tension between utility and joy reveals the most human dimension of the medieval city's relationship with its most vital resource. The relentless rhythm of the trip hammer was the sound of a new age dawning. While the grinding of grain mills was a familiar comfort, medieval engineers soon realized the water wheel's potential for far greater tasks. They adapted its ceaseless rotation to operate massive, power-hungry machinery, driving a proto-industrial revolution from the riverbanks. This was the 16th transformation, where hydraulic power moved beyond simple milling to become the engine of early manufacturing. In the forges, water wheels lifted heavy wooden hammers, which then dropped with incredible force to beat red-hot iron into shape. This allowed for the mass production of tools, nails, and weaponry on a scale previously unimaginable. Alongside the forges, the cloth industry was revolutionized by fulling mills. Here, the hammers pounded woven wool in a mixture of water and clay, thickening and cleansing the fabric in a process that once required days of strenuous human labor. The same hydraulic force was even applied to paper production, with mills pulping rags into a slurry that could be pressed and dried into sheets, fueling a growing demand for books and the spread of literacy. This concentration of water-powered workshops created the world's first specialized manufacturing districts. Entire neighborhoods became dedicated to metalworking or cloth finishing, their identities and economies forged by the flow of the river. These were the direct precursors to our modern industrial parks, shaping the economic geography of cities for generations. A town with a powerful, reliable river could become a center for armor production or fine woolens, its name synonymous with quality across the continent. Yet this industrial boom came with a deafening, gritty reality. The constant, thunderous pounding of the trip hammers created a noise pollution that must have been unbearable for those living nearby. The air in these districts was thick with coal smoke from the forges and the acrid smell of chemicals from the fulling vats. The very river that powered these industries ran dark with waste, a toxic brew of metallic filings and organic residue. This created intense social friction, as residential areas found themselves encroached upon by these noisy, dirty, and dangerous sites of production. The quest for economic progress and the desire for a peaceful, healthy home life were suddenly in direct conflict, another hidden social cost written into the landscape. How does a community balance the undeniable benefits of industry with the quality of daily life for its people? This ancient tension between production and pollution, between economic might and human well-being, is a legacy of those first water-powered hammers that still echoes in our cities today. A city's true strength was measured not by the water flowing through its fountains, but by the water it managed to save for a dry day. The 17th transformation was an engineering of foresight, the creation of vast, hidden reservoirs that gave a city the gift of time. Beneath the bustling streets and squares, medieval engineers constructed enormous underground cisterns, colossal chambers designed to capture and store every precious drop of rainwater and spring flow. These were not mere buckets, but architectural marvels like the Basilica cistern in Constantinople, a submerged palace supported by a forest of columns, holding an entire lake in reserve beneath the city's feet. This was drought mitigation on a grand scale, a buffer against the unpredictable whims of nature. When the primary aqueducts ran low during a summer drought, or if a source became temporarily contaminated, the city could tap this hidden treasury, buying weeks or even months of continued life. In more arid regions, this mastery extended deep into the earth itself with the construction of canals, those brilliant subterranean channels that used gentle slopes to tap into distant groundwater and guide it for miles to the city without a single drop lost to evaporation. This knowledge of underground hydrology was a form of civic magic, allowing settlements to thrive in landscapes that otherwise seemed barren. But this resilience came at a staggering cost. The labor and materials required to build and maintain these massive storage systems consumed fortunes that could have been spent on walls or palaces. It demanded constant vigilance, a dedicated corps of workers to keep the vaults clean and the channels clear of silt. A neglected cistern could become a stagnant, algae-choked swamp, its water undrinkable in the very moment of crisis. The system's success relied entirely on a society's willingness to invest in a tomorrow that might never come, a test of long-term thinking that many cities ultimately failed. When that foresight wavered, when the maintenance was deferred or the funds diverted, The consequences were not merely inconvenient, they were catastrophic, a lesson written in the dust of abandoned wells and the silent desperation of a city whose hidden reserves had run dry. A river was more than a source of water, it was a liquid road. For cities built along these flowing highways, the water system became the very skeleton of movement, connecting distant neighborhoods and weaving the city into a web of regional trade. The construction of wharves and harbors transformed muddy riverbanks into bustling commercial ports, where cranes powered by human or animal muscle loaded and unloaded cargo from flat-bottomed barges. These vessels moved goods with an efficiency that overland carts on rutted, dangerous roads could never match. A single barge could carry the grain from entire fields or the timber for a new city quarter, dramatically reducing the cost of essential goods and allowing urban populations to swell far beyond what local agriculture could support. This connectivity reached its zenith with the development of the pound lock, a brilliant chamber with gates at both ends that could raise or lower boats to navigate different water levels. This invention, perfected in the Low Countries and Italy, was a marvel of hydraulic engineering that linked inland cities directly to the sea. A merchant in Cologne could now ship his goods all the way to the markets of London or Bruges without the costly and risky process of transshipment, fostering an unprecedented level of economic interdependence across Europe. Yet this liquid network, for all its efficiency, created a profound and constant vulnerability. An enemy did not need to storm the gates to cripple such a city, they simply had to control the river upstream. A blockade could starve a metropolis in weeks, cutting off the flow of food and supplies that its massive population depended on, and the river itself could turn from a benefactor into a destroyer. A sudden spring thaw could send floodwaters surging over wharves and into warehouses, ruining stored goods and drowning low-lying districts. Meanwhile, the slow, silent process of silting demanded continuous, back-breaking dredging to keep the channels navigable. A neglected port could find its connection to the wider world choked off by river sediment, a slow death by mud. The very waterways that gave these cities their life and wealth also held the power to strangle them, a reminder that no system of connectivity comes without a price of constant vigilance and inherent risk. The most powerful statement a medieval ruler could make was not carved in stone but flowing from a fountain. In the sun-drenched courtyard of a royal palace, an intricate network of jets and spouts played in a carefully choreographed display, a liquid spectacle designed to awe every visitor. This was not merely a source of water, it was hydraulic theater, a direct and undeniable demonstration of control over nature itself. A monarch who could command water to dance for his amusement was a monarch whose power seemed both absolute and divinely sanctioned. This symbolic language extended from the private gardens of the elite to the very heart of the public square. When a city council commissioned a grand new aqueduct, it was an act of political propaganda as much as civic engineering. The monumental arches marching across the countryside proclaimed the municipality's wealth, its technical sophistication, and its commitment to the well-being of its citizens. A leader who delivered clean water secured a far more durable legacy than one who merely won a battle, weaving his name directly into the daily lives of the people. This deep connection is preserved in the heraldry of the time. The seals of riverine cities like Ghent or Strasbourg often featured ships, bridges, or stylized waves, branding the community's identity around its mastery of water. To control the flow was to control the city's destiny, a fact every citizen understood each time they drank from a public fountain. Yet this pursuit of prestige carried a dangerous temptation. The political glory of a breathtaking fountain could easily overshadow the mundane necessity of repairing a leaky pipe in a poor neighborhood. A city might pour a fortune into a single, glorious water monument, an extravagant project that drained the public treasury for a symbol of prosperity while the practical network that supported it quietly decayed. How do we measure the true cost of a symbol when the price is paid not in gold, but in neglected infrastructure and forgotten neighborhoods? This ancient tension between monumental prestige and practical need reveals a political truth as clear as water itself, that the grandest displays of power often hide the most critical vulnerabilities. A water wheel lifting water from the river Orontes in Syria looked remarkably similar to one turning on the Thames in England. This was no coincidence. The medieval world was bound together by a hidden current of shared knowledge, where water systems thrived on a vibrant cross-cultural exchange. The brilliant Noria, a massive water-lifting wheel powered by the river's own flow, journeyed from the Islamic world into the heart of Europe, bringing with it a new efficiency for irrigation and urban supply. This transfer was not accidental. It happened in the great melting pots of scholarship in cities like Toledo and Sicily, where Christian, Jewish, and Muslim scholars worked side by side to translate ancient Greek and Roman engineering texts into Latin and Arabic. A treatise on aqueducts by a Roman engineer, preserved by an Islamic scholar in Baghdad, could be translated by a team in Spain and then studied by a monk in France, who would adapt its principles to build a new conduit for his monastery. This was a global network long before the word had meaning, a slow but steady conversation across continents that accelerated urban development everywhere. The result was not mere imitation but creative adaptation. European engineers, lacking the same abundance of slave labor as the Romans, combined Roman arch designs with local timber and stone to create aqueducts that were both sturdy and cost-effective. A system in one city might use Islamic ceramic pipes for their durability, while another adopted a Persian technique for filtering water through sand and gravel. This cross-pollination led to beautifully hybrid systems, perfectly tailored to local climates and resources, yet this interconnectedness had a dark side. When a design flaw caused a conduit to fail in Cairo, that same flawed principle, carried along trade routes in a copied manuscript, might be repeated in Marseille a generation later. The very network that spread brilliant solutions could also transmit catastrophic misunderstandings, a stark reminder that human innovation is a chain, and its strength is only as reliable as its weakest link. This ancient lesson in globalized knowledge forces us to ask, in our own interconnected age, how we can better share our successes without inheriting the failures of others. The stench of a polluted well was not just an annoyance, it was a warning. As medieval cities swelled with humanity, the connection between foul water and rampant disease became impossible to ignore, even if the reason remained a mystery. This dawning awareness sparked the 21st transformation, the birth of public health regulation. Town councils began to issue stern ordinances, forbidding butchers from washing their offal in public conduits and banning tanners from dumping their chemical vats upstream of the drinking supply. These were not suggestions, they were early laws for civic survival, an attempt to impose order on the chaos of urban growth. To enforce these new rules, cities appointed the first water inspectors, officials known as water bailiffs or conduit wardens. These men were the frontline defenders of public health, armed with the authority to patrol the waterways, inspect pipes for illegal taps, and levy fines on those who contaminated the shared resource. This created a primitive but vital form of municipal administration dedicated solely to community well-being. Their understanding was flawed, of course. They believed in miasma theory, the idea that disease was spread by bad air emanating from rotting waste, not by invisible organisms in the water itself. Yet by targeting the filth they could see and smell, their actions accidentally reduced the actual microbial threats. Cleaning a conduit of visible sludge, even for the wrong reason, still removed the environment where pathogens thrived. This represented a profound shift toward collective responsibility, a recognition that the health of one person was tied to the actions of their neighbor. But this new regulatory framework was fragile and painfully inconsistent. A wealthy merchant could often bribe a water bailiff to look the other way, while a poor immigrant family might face the full force of the law for a minor infraction. The system was also perpetually overwhelmed. A handful of inspectors could not possibly monitor every privy, every workshop, and every stretch of river in a city of thousands. The fundamental technological limitations remained. The wooden pipes still ran near cesspits, and the science of purification was centuries away. So while these early regulations marked a critical step forward in human organization, they were like a bandage on a deep wound, a well-intentioned effort that could not stop the bleeding. This gap between knowing something was wrong and having the power to truly fix it defines the final, tragic failure of these systems, a failure that would soon culminate in one of the darkest chapters of urban history. The ghost of the medieval conduit keeper still walks the corridors of your city's water department. Those early systems of pipes, laws, and public fountains were not a dead end, but a direct blueprint for the modern world. The very idea that clean water is a public good, managed by the community for the benefit of all, was forged in the crowded, contentious streets of medieval cities. When a town council appointed its first water bailiff to patrol the conduits, it was creating the model for today's municipal utility worker. The legal battles over riparian rights, determining who could use a river and how, established principles that still govern water law. This was the birth of a civic philosophy, a recognition that some resources are too vital to be left entirely to private hands. You can still trace this ancient lineage in the infrastructure of many European cities. Beneath the streets of London, Paris, and Siena, modern water mains often snake through tunnels first carved in the Middle Ages, following the same logic of gravity and geography that medieval engineers so painstakingly discovered. The organizational chart of a public works department, with its divisions for maintenance, inspection, and quality control, is a direct descendant of the medieval guilds and municipal offices created to manage a fragile network of wooden pipes and stone aqueducts. This long evolution reveals a profound truth about urban life. Our greatest modern comforts, the simple turn of a tap for clean water, rest upon centuries of trial and error, of conflict and cooperation. The medieval struggle to balance private need with public welfare, to fund maintenance while chasing innovation, is the same struggle every city faces today. Their hidden failures taught us the cost of neglect, while their successes laid the very foundation we now build upon. How many of the solutions we seek for a sustainable future are already written in the forgotten maps of these ancient water systems? A city's promise of a steady drink of clean water was a siren call to the countryside. For a peasant family facing a poor harvest or a landless laborer with few prospects, the news of a town's new public fountain and its bustling cloth mills represented a chance at a different life. This was the great demographic pull of the medieval water system, a force that drew people inward and upward, transforming the human landscape of Europe. The growing water-powered industries, the fulling mills, forges, and breweries, created an insatiable demand for workers, offering wages and a form of economic freedom unknown in the feudal villages. People voted with their feet, abandoning the precarious rural life for the crowded, chaotic, but opportunity-rich city streets. This massive migration fueled the great urbanization of the High Middle Ages, turning regional market towns like Ghent and Florence into powerhouse cities of tens of thousands. The very ability to support such a dense population was a miracle of hydraulic engineering. A natural spring or a single well might have supported a village of a few hundred, but it took a network of aqueducts, conduits, and reservoirs to quench the thirst of a city of 50,000. Water systems literally expanded the carrying capacity of the urban environment, allowing human society to concentrate in ways previously thought impossible. This concentration became the engine of the Renaissance, bringing together the artists, merchants, thinkers, and artisans whose close proximity would spark an unparalleled explosion of culture and commerce. Yet this very success intensified every single hidden failure we have traced. More people meant more waste, overwhelming the primitive sewers and turning rivers into open sewers. More people meant fiercer competition for the clean water that was suddenly in short supply again, deepening the social divides between those with private pipes and those waiting at the public fountain. The incredible growth powered by water created a profound and perpetual vulnerability, a cycle where the solution to one problem, supporting a larger population, inevitably bred a host of new, more dangerous ones. Every broken pipe pulled from the mud tells a story, the physical remnants of medieval water systems, from the ghostly outlines of filled-in moats to the preserved sections of hollowed-out log pipes unearthed in urban digs, provide our most tangible connection to this hidden world. When archaeologists carefully map the course of a long-buried conduit, they are not just tracing a path for water. They are reconstructing the daily rhythm of a city, revealing which neighborhoods were prioritized and which were left to thirst. A stone cistern's capacity tells us about a community's foresight, while the sediment trapped inside it holds a chemical record of their diet, their industries, and their waste. These landscapes are a permanent archive etched into the earth, showing how human ingenuity and adaptation physically reshaped the environment to meet collective needs. The gentle depression where a millstream once ran, now a city park path, or the slight rise of a former riverbank fortified long ago are all part of this story. Studying these systems offers a holistic view of medieval life, far beyond mere technology. The centralized public fountain speaks to a value of community, while the private pipe leading to a noble's house whispers of social stratification. The location of a tanner's quarter, confirmed by soil analysis downstream from the city center, confirms the economic zoning that separated clean living from dirty work. This legacy is a powerful reminder that our own modern cities are not built on blank slate. They are constructed upon layers of past decisions, both brilliant and flawed. Every time we turn on a tap, we are interacting with the latest chapter in a story that began with those first medieval engineers listening for the sound of a spring. Their successes and their hidden failures are a deep well of wisdom, inviting us to learn from their choices as we face our own hydraulic challenges. What permanent marks are we leaving in the landscape for future generations to uncover, and what will they say about the values of our age? Water was the silent architect of urban destiny, a force that carved the very soul of the medieval city. This journey through 24 transformations reveals a profound duality. The same networks of conduits and mills that forged vibrant communities and powered economic revolutions also concealed the seeds of their own decay. Public fountains nurtured civic pride while masking deep social divides. Mighty aqueducts demonstrated brilliant engineering, yet remained perpetually vulnerable to rupture and sabotage. Water systems enabled cities to reach unprecedented heights of population and culture, but this very success intensified the hidden failures of pollution, inequality, and environmental strain. The ultimate lesson written in these ancient pipes is not one of simple triumph or failure. It is a warning that technological progress, for all its glory, is never enough by itself. True resilience requires equitable access for all citizens, not just the powerful. It demands sustainable management that respects the limits of the environment, rather than plundering it for short-term gain. The medieval struggle to balance public good with private control and monumental innovation with mundane maintenance is a struggle we inherit today. Look at the water flowing from your own tap. See it not just as a utility, but as the latest chapter in this ancient story. Consider how we can build a future that learns from both the triumphs and the tragic mistakes of the past, creating systems that are not only intelligent but also just and enduring. What echoes of these medieval choices do you see in our modern world? Share your reflections and join us as we continue to uncover the hidden layers of history.